how cool it is to have a thought-provoking chat with some of the creators in this world. Let it be author, a YouTuber, dancer, and so on. Yes, we are introducing our creator series where we will be having chat or Zoom interview with more of the great creators in this world. In this video, we are going to have Zoom interview with author cum journalist Mr. Eric Weiner, who has written books like Geography of Bliss, Geography of Genius, and the new book which is yet to be launched is Socrates Express. And before getting into this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. That will motivate us to make more videos.
Namaste, namaskar.
Hi Eric, how are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you? So.
Yeah, same here. India is on a lockdown. So we are,
yes. And maybe a war with China too. So,
yeah. So there are some border tensions going on.
Yeah.
Yes, in beautiful Ladakh.
Idea about this interview is that we have split into three themes. First is about travel, the books that you have written. Second is about writing, your writing workshop, your writing process and all that.
Yes.
And finally, some general questions about yourself, the things you like. Yeah.
Ready to go.
Okay, got it. So my first question, in your website, you call yourself philosophical traveler. So how did you come up with this term? Did it you started travel and then you included philosophy, or how did you come up with this?
Well, I think, most travel writers, they write about, just the place, what I saw, what I did, what adventures I have. But for me, I've always been kind of an idea person, so that I'm drawn to ideas. But I also love to travel. So I write, I think, at the intersection of place and idea together. So that if I'm going to Bhutan or to Thailand or to Iceland, I'm always thinking, what is the idea that animates this place and that motivates the people? Okay. Because behind every place, I believe there is an idea that even the inhabitants of the place may not be aware of. But in a country like India, there are probably many ideas. 360 million gods and probably 360 million ideas too. So it's kind of a hybrid, I would say, of hybrid genre that I tried to create, and a hybrid way of traveling, so that I combine ideas and place.
Okay.
Philosophical traveler, yes.
Cool. We were really inspired by the book Geography of Bliss, which I read that, and from that we felt that we should read at least one place, we should visit one place, Bhutan. So that's how we selected Bhutan and we visited that place. And what actually brought in or struck your mind to write Geography of Bliss, as well as one place from Geography of Bliss which actually more touchy with your mind?
I was, at the time, I was working as a correspondent for NPR. I was foreign correspondent. So I was based in various places, in Delhi, also in Jerusalem and in Tokyo. And it was a good job. It was very interesting on one level. But also I realized that here I was traveling around the world, writing about the people and places, reporting for the radio, on the negative, because that's what journalism does. It focuses, not on the positive things in the place, but if there's a war, or, right now, if I was in India, I'd maybe write about the lockdown or the tensions with China. As someone who's already, as I write in the book, I've struggled with some depression all my life. And I woke up one morning and thought, why am I going to these different countries and writing about the most miserable places and parts of it? What if, every great idea begins with those two words, what if? What if I spent a year traveling the world looking for the happiest places? What would those places look like? What could we learn from them? What could I learn from them? And I presented the idea actually, I think, to my editor at NPR, and he was like, "Well, no, that's not what we do as journalists." So then I thought, well, okay, I'm going to write a book about it, and I did, and it was quite successful, and that was very satisfying because I was writing more from the heart, I think, than in my news reports. Was able to be more personal, funnier, I hope, and to really dig deeper into a place.
Okay. So some of these authors, when they write about certain places, they want to go to this particular restaurant. All of these places, only if they go to that restaurant or the place or whichever place, then they will write about it. So you also follow that. Do you visit all these places and only then write about it? How do you? What is the process of travel writing?
I don't quite understand the connection with the restaurant. What do you mean exactly?
So there is this author called, I mean, you would have heard from Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code. So I have heard a story that if he is writing about a character which goes to a particular cafeteria in Rome and having some dish, he would have already been there, had the same dish, and then only then he will write about it. Right? So they will look for that kind of authenticity or research.
I mean, as far as my process, I believe in preparing, but not over preparing for a trip. So what I mean by that is if I'm going to, say, Bhutan, I will read up about the history and somewhat the culture of Bhutan, but I won't read other travelers, writers' accounts of, recent accounts. Maybe from 100 years ago, I might read that, but I won't read about another travel writer who went to Bhutan because I don't want my impressions to be clouded and muddied by his or hers. So I sort of try to leave something open to the first impressions you get of a place, so that they're fresh. I believe in kind of planting myself in not moving around too much, going to one or two places. I have kind of the 20% rule, which is I figure out how much time I need in a place and then I add 20% at least, because more time is always better and slower is always better. And I try to leave, to not be so rigid in what I'm going to see and do. I'll have an idea, but I try to remain flexible. So if I go to a country and I think it's about X and I realize, no, really the idea here, the story here is about Y, I have the flexibility. I also follow what I call the golden thread, which is a term a friend of mine used, which is you rely on friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends to figure out who to talk to. So say I was going to visit Bengaluru and I was going to do a story. Well, I would send a message to Satya and I would say, I'd love to see you, and who else should I meet when I'm in Bengaluru? And you might say, oh, you should meet Rajiv. And then I'll send a message to Rajiv and ask Rajiv, who should I meet? And people, when you're visiting their country, can be very generous that way and say, and point you in directions. And I think, to be honest, people are generous because they respond to the intention of the writer. Like, are you open-minded? Are you here to really understand the culture? And if they pick up on that, if they think, yes, I am, they're more likely to be generous and offer suggestions. So, this idea that you get what you give.
Yeah. The next question is about your Socrates Express book, which you are working on and about to launch, right? So, can you give a little bit hint about it, whether it's about philosophy or about travel? Yeah.
This is what they call a galley or advanced copy, which goes out to magazines and newspapers and places like that. So this is what the book will look like. Do I need to hold it upside down?
Lovely.
And anyway, it's the Socrates Express in search of life lessons from dead philosophers. For this book, I really became the philosophical traveler in that I went to some 14 places, including Delhi, looking at some philosopher who either lived there, was born there, or has some relevance to the place. And each chapter is a how-to question. So, for instance, it opens with how to get out of bed, like Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor and a Stoic philosopher, how to wonder like Socrates, how to walk like Rousseau, how to see like Henry David Thoreau, how to listen like Schopenhauer, how to enjoy like Epicurus, and how to fight like Gandhi. So, and that's just a few of them. So I am taking trains as much as I could to as many places. Travel thousands of miles by train because the idea is the train is the sort of more philosophical way to travel, a more thoughtful way than taking an airplane. And so each chapter opens with me on a train, and it explores those simple questions of, through the lens of this particular philosopher, how to do all these things. And it sort of takes you through the course of a day, beginning with, the morning questions, I call them, which are things like how to wonder and how to see that really as a child you have to learn. And then the more middle of life questions like how to fight and how to be kind like Confucius. And then the end of life questions like how to grow old like Simone de Beauvoir, and even how to die like Montaigne, a French philosopher. And I'm proud of the book. I hope when you launch a book, publish it, it's like sending a child into the world. You want it to do well, but it's up to the child, really. So we'll see.
Okay.
August 25th in the US, and hopefully available in India as well.
Yeah, it's the same date for India also. I was searching for the book in Kindle. It said August 25, 2020.
Okay, good.
And since you mentioned India and Gandhi, it brings me two questions actually. The first question is, usually when people think of India and philosophy, they migrate towards Buddha, because there's philosophy, Buddhist philosophy. There's a lot of reams and reams of books and stories written about it. Why did you choose Gandhi and not say...
Right. So, I think Buddha would fall under the category of a philosopher, but a religious philosopher. And I've written about religion before. I wanted to make this more about philosophy. Most people, you're correct, think of Gandhi as a independence leader, as a politician, a lawyer. He was all these things. But really, there was a philosophy underlying his satyagraha and his whole his ideas. He was very philosophical, but he once said, and I'll paraphrase here, that a journalist was asking him to sum up his ideas, and he said, basically, my philosophy is my action. He once said, my life is my message is my life. So that you see his philosophy in the satyagraha protests, in nonviolence, in the way he interacted with the world. But he was grounded in, he read Tolstoy, he read Henry David Thoreau, he was influenced by the Bhagavad Gita very much, and so he had all these readings he did, but it got channeled. He wrote a lot, but he's known for his action more than his words, and I thought that's important, that philosophy, at least here in the West, has become something that's just a subject you study in school that nobody can understand, written by these old dead people. And I think it's just hugely important, especially now. What they call the epigraph, which is the little quote you put in the front of the book. And mine, I think, is a particularly good one. It's from a French philosopher named Maurice Riesling. And he says, sooner or later, life makes philosophers of us all. And I think that's very true, that look what's happened to the world in the last few months. We're all philosophers. We're all trying to cope with the lockdown, with border tensions, with race situation we have here in the U.S. And you need the philosophy as something to fall back on during hard times and good times. So, yeah, that's the new book.
Okay. Since you mentioned how to fight is the topic of your chapter on Gandhiji, So I remember this story about, I think he mentioned that in his book also. He says that Satyagraha is in a way kind of based on his wife's action. So his wife, what's her name? Kasturba, sorry. His wife Kasturba, whenever they used to have a domestic quarrel,
Yes,
something like that,
they did.
she used to be very silent, not talk to him, not kind of obey to him, not be subservient to him. So he kind of makes that as an inspiration and say, maybe I can also create something like that for India. Of course, it's based on, I mean, his philosophy has a deep roots of non-violence and stuff. So one of his
Right.
inspiration of Satyagraha comes from his wife. So
No,
does it?
that's interesting. I've heard that. I mean, look, where do we get our ideas from? We get them from books, but we get them from our life, our lived experience. And, Gandhi was affected by the Bhagavad Gita and the Jain teachers that he had, but he was also affected by his time in London, where he studied law, and certainly in South Africa and at home with his wife. And this is the thing. I'll be honest. I have had this really long interest in Gandhi and his ideas and the sort of optimism and the idealism behind them. I've met with Rajmohan Gandhi, one of his grandchildren, and I've read. I mean, I can show you.
Okay.
It's a bit of an obsession, actually. I've got books that he's written, books about him. This is his autobiography, My Experiments, the story of my experiments with truth. And I know that his reputation in India now and around the world is changing a bit. People say he wasn't so great, and he was not so. He was not a saint, that term Mahatma, he never really liked it. Great soul. He had his flaws. He was a bad husband, really, to Kasturba for many years. He admits that. He was not a great father to his children. He was a father to the country more than to his children. He had some weird ideas about sex, let's be honest, and he tried experiments with his grandnieces, and now I guess some scholars have found evidence he said some racist things in South Africa. So not a saint. And then some people in India, will now tell me that, Gandhi was not perfect, so we shouldn't listen to him. Well, who is perfect? I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
You're not perfect. So let's take him for what he was, which was not a saint, but a sort of courageous person who lived by his convictions, and stuck to them. Never said really, okay, forget Satyagraha, let's go with violence. What I found so interesting about him is his idea that how you do something matters more than the result, right? That we put 100% effort into what you do, but you don't really care about the result. And that's so different. As a Westerner, we're always told to be results oriented, right? That it's not win at any cost. That's an expression we have here. And for Gandhiji, it was not victory at any cost. He said many times he'd rather see India remain under the British than to gain her independence through violence. Because he thought basically, if you have a violent revolution, then you have a violent society. That's the result. That you bear that's the harvest that you've created. So I found his ideas, and I still very compelling. I think in the chapter did, I think, a good job of explaining what his notion of Satyagraha and his philosophy is. I hope people agree.
Yeah.
But people in India will disagree because they always disagree when you write about India.
We agree with most of the thoughts that you shared.
Yeah.
And I can also remember, sorry, this is going deeper into Gandhi, but there was a Champaran protest during the Indian independence struggle. And India was almost close to kind of getting freedom at that stage. But Gandhiji stopped that protest, saying that Indians had kind of destroyed a police station, killed some British people. So he said, I'm going to stop this at that time. So it kind of stopped the whole momentum, and then it took almost more than 10 years after that for India to...
Yes, I remember that. And people were like, what are you doing? And he was about the purity of nonviolence. but people don't realize that he really was about courage more. He once said, oh, I just saw this quote. Here, I'm going to actually, I want to get his words
Correctly.
right. So bear with me.
Right.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. This is and this is sort of a lesser known quote from Gandhi. The only thing he hated more than violence, he said, was cowardice. Inaction at a time of conflagration is inexcusable. So he thought better violence than cowardice. Like to him, that was the worst thing you could be, was to do nothing. And so people think he was a pacifist, that he just sat there, but he didn't. He confronted the British and injustice where he saw it, and he would be out on the streets of America, I'm sure now, protesting about racial injustice. So, yeah.
You always consider him as a change leader to the protest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming to the next question is that when I remember Eric, it's all about the next workshops, writing workshops, which you do in Bhutan as well as Nepal once,
Right.
sometimes in a year, right? So can you say about your experience about that writing workshop?
Right. So this was, I'd written about the Tibetan Buddhists in Kathmandu for my second book, and I met an American guy there who used to be a banker in the U.S., making lots of money, and he quit and he moved to Kathmandu to become a Buddhist and study Buddhism full time. So I thought, this is an interesting guy. His name is James Hopkins, and we met, and this is the difference between writing a book versus writing a news story. A news story, I would meet with him 5 minutes and say, okay, I have what I need from you. Goodbye. It would be like transactional. But we met over several days and we became friends, James and I. We stayed in touch. And he was already bringing Americans to Kathmandu for yoga. He said, we should do a writing workshop. Call it the Himalayan Writers Workshop and do it in Kathmandu. And I was skeptical. My wife was even more skeptical. This is never going to happen. But it did. And we got a group together, not just Americans, some Brits, a woman from India who's now in Bangalore, I believe, who joined the group. And I had never talked before. This was about 5 years ago. And I was pretty nervous about whether I could do it, but it went very well. It was very gratifying. I found out that I never really thought about my writing process, explaining it. I just sort of did it, but now I had to explain it, and I could. And we moved around the Kathmandu Valley, staying in different hotels and spending sort of half the day exploring the valley and half the day working, what they call workshopping, which is reading each other's work, trying to be helpful. And we did it every year. And then a writer friend here in Washington, D.C. said, let's hold one out in Arizona in the west of the U.S. And I did that last year. And it is enjoyable. I am surprised how much I enjoy teaching writing. I don't know if you can teach writing per se, but it's like exercises. You can work the muscles. It's like being a fitness coach more than being a professor, and you're at the gym.
That's more therapeutic, Eric, when you were helping them to do the writing, right? Creative writing. Was that more therapeutic for you as well as for the writers?
I think it was, because I sort of got all these ideas about writing out into the world, which I never realized I had, about what makes for a good sentence or a good story. And, it requires some, diplomacy and kindness too, because when people write something, it's very personal. I mean, it's really, the work is personal. You're making yourself vulnerable by handing in a piece of writing and everyone looking at it. It's like a piece of art, and people are judging, is this good or bad? And I try to get past the notion of good or bad and look at the writing and say, what's working here? What could work better? And you sort of, in a little group, we were a group of 10, 12 people, you have to build up that trust over the course of the workshop so that, you're not going to expose yourself to a stranger or make yourself vulnerable, but as you get to know each other, people trust each other more.
Okay. So in these workshops, do you help people to write a book, or is it like to help write the
You
article?
know, we get people in doing different things. Some people are quote unquote serious writers who might be working on a book and will work on one chapter with them or help get them unstuck. Other people really just have always thought about writing and wanted to try more writing, and that's perfectly fine. The only requirement is what we call seriousness of intent. Are you serious about being here and trying to improve your writing? And whether you're a professional writer or someone who's never really written much at all, that's okay. And I've been quite surprised and pleasantly surprised at how good a lot of the writing is. Really good.
How do you find like the topic, your book topic, let it be a geography of bliss?
Which combines travel and
Yeah,
happiness.
yeah.
Other is about.
Well, this is my fourth book now, and this is really about wisdom. And in fact, one publisher in Bulgaria who's publishing it is calling it the geography of wisdom. So I've written about happiness. I've written about God and spirituality. I've written about creativity and genius, and now wisdom. So they're all big ideas. No small ideas there, and so they're big topics, and I'm drawn to the big ideas. So I'm thinking like, what is the big underlying question of our time? What that we don't talk about enough, right? I mean, if it's politics, we have enough of that, right? So I'm not interested in writing a book about politics, for instance, but happiness, God, genius, wisdom, the big ones, the big questions.
Okay. Okay. So in your when you were sharing about Socrates Express, you said each of the topics is about how to, like how to
Right.
write, how to see, and all that. So let's say if there is a chapter in a book about you saying Eric Weiner how to write. What is your philosophy of writing? What is your process of writing? How do you go about it? What are the things you want to do? What are the things you want to avoid in writing? Yeah,
Oh, boy.
basically your writing philosophy.
Well, I think some of the advice that we typically get about writing is actually not helpful. For instance, somehow this idea that writing's supposed to be easy, and that if you're a writer, it's easy. So the German writer Thomas Mann, he once said, the definition of a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. That actually, if you're a writer, it's more difficult for you to write than someone who's not a writer.
Yeah.
And I think most writers get that and that's why I don't trust writers when they say, "Oh, it just comes out perfect the first time." It never comes out perfect the first time. So really, writing is revising. You're getting down a very rough draft, and you're kind of refining it like a jeweler. You know, you take a hunk of coal and you turn it into a diamond. So writing is not easy. Number one, and that's okay. Number two, writing is about revising, rewriting. That is really that is not just part of the writing process, that is the writing process. And typically writers are told to write about what you know, right? Write about what you know. And I think that's wrong also. I think you write about what you want to know.
And get to know it in the process of writing.
Yeah, and that's driving you. Like there's a question driving you. So you're not writing about what you know exactly. You're writing about what you want to know. So people say, "Oh, did you study philosophy in school?" Oh, no, I didn't, and I wish I did. So this is my way of doing it. I wanted to know about philosophy. So that sense of curiosity and really to wonder about the world, which is slightly different from curiosity, I think, in a bigger concept. It's a concept of wonder. And I think that's the one thing that you really indispensable to have as a writer is that sense of curiosity and wonder about the world. And I can teach you how to craft a sentence and to rewrite it, but I can't teach you how to be curious about the world. That's got to come from inside. But once you have that, we can work on getting that curiosity out of you and onto the page.
What is that one book which you liked it when you have read it?
When I read it.
Yeah.
Well, it's right here. I think it's right here. This is, and I use it in my class. This is called Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, Italian writer who passed away a few years ago. It's a small little book, as you can see.
Yeah.
And I call it a travel book, but it's technically not, because it's a work of fiction. And that in the book, Calvino describes basically 51 or 56 little cities, but they're imaginary, and they're all have something strange going on. Like, instead of air, there's dirt, and everyone's moving around dirt, or people hang from the sky. There's a city in the sky, or all these imaginary ways of what's called invisible cities. They're these cities that, and he describes them beautifully in sometimes a page or 2 pages. And I find it sparks my imagination. It just dipping into it and reading it fills me with this sense of wonder about the world and possibilities. And it's, I would say, my favorite book to this day. And I use it even though if I'm teaching travel writing and these are imaginary places, I use it to show how Calvino uses language and his imagination, which is ultimately, that's all we have as writers. We have language, imagination, curiosity. These are the skills. It's not, do you have good grammar or spelling? I'm a terrible speller. They have terrible handwriting. That's not what makes a good writer. Yeah.
So in a workshop, you would have met a lot of aspiring writers, budding writers. So you would also know the kind of common mistakes that they would make. And probably there are aspiring writers seeing this. So what are the things that an aspiring writer should follow, mistakes they should avoid?
Well, I think one of the mistakes people make is to try to be someone they're not, and to write like somebody else. You need, when people talk about having a voice, that's your voice.
Yes.
You can't acquire someone else's voice. That's like wearing their clothes. It's not going to fit right. It's not going to look right. So writing with your own voice is important. I think another common mistake is people, I said revising is important, and it's true, but first you've got to write without the inner critic or the inner editor speaking to you. Like, people tend to start to write a sentence and the voice in their head says, you know, that's no good, you're never right, or that's a bad sentence, or you can't say that. You know, all these voices of the editor and the critic come in too soon, right? So people, first you have to write freely as you can, and then you look back at it and say, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe I can say that differently. But you need to let yourself go first, and just put it all out there. Don't worry if it's rough. Don't worry if it's bad. You're going to change it later. Those are a couple of the mistakes people make, and we try to work on that. On you know, we do something called free writing exercise, which is you take a notebook. I say next 10, 15 minutes, whatever the time is, you're going to just write. And you're not going to lift your pen up once. You're going to keep going, no matter what. And at first people were like, well, what if I have nothing to say? Then write that you have nothing to say. So it's a way of getting past that internal editor that often stops us from expressing ourselves.
Okay. Next are some general questions about yourself to get to know more about you.
Okay. Gotcha.
You want to know who is Eric and how their family is supporting in your writing process. And you have traveled a lot alone also, right?
Well, I have a family that supports me, which is great, that in what I do. And I'm either home all the time or I'm gone for a long time. I mean, it's not like the typical 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. life. if I'm home all the time, even before the lockdown, my life was kind of partly a lockdown life, in that I write from home mainly. And there's a Ganesha behind me. I don't know if you can see it there in the painting. And when I travel, they're kind of ready to get rid of me by that point. So I go off and will travel for usually a few weeks at a time. But I always travel alone. This is the thing. I'll travel with my family on holiday, but if I'm working on a book, I really believe that it's important to travel by yourself as a travel writer, because if you travel as a couple or a small group, you create a bubble around you where you basically say to other people, don't talk to me, don't talk to us, I'm part of this group. It could be a group of two, even in a couple. But if you travel by yourself, you make yourself more vulnerable, more approachable. So I always travel alone, and I feel that's important. Yeah.
Okay. So any recent books that you read and you really like that you would recommend other people to read?
One friend of mine wrote a book called The Nature Fix. I don't have a copy right here. The Nature Fix by Florence Williams. It's about why nature makes us feel good, and the science behind why going to a park in Bangalore will improve your mood and your happiness. And there's a whole science behind it, and it's called The Nature Fix, like we need our nature fix. And by Florence Williams, that was quite good. I'm enjoying My Bright Abyss by Christian Wyman, Meditations of a Modern Believer. It's a very thoughtful book about leading a spiritual or religious life. And I quite like that. It's one of those books that you read very slowly. And more on the science of happiness, Transcend, The New Science of Self-Actualization by Scott Kaufman, a PhD psychologist, but he writes in an approachable way. And he quotes me in the book, I should say, just a little bit, which is nice. I tend to read more nonfiction than fiction, but I'm trying to read more novels.
Okay. And recently, any movies that you saw that you liked and you would recommend?
I quite liked the movie A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood about our children's television personality, Mr. Rogers, starring Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
What I liked about that movie, I don't know if it made it over there, is it, again, like Gandhi, right? Mr. Rogers is seen as this perfect person. People grow up, at least in my generation, you knew about him, this very sweet man. Yeah, the Mr. Rogers movie. That's one that sticks with me. There was also a sweet movie called The Two Popes.
Okay.
Two Popes. About the two popes who, based on the true story of, was it Pope Benedict, who passed off to Pope Francis. Actually, nobody quits being Pope, right? Until he did. And it was unprecedented. And their relationship's very, very sweet. And
thanks for taking it.
Namaskar. It was my pleasure. You had good questions. I hope it was helpful and good for you. And hope to see you soon. And say goodbye to Satya for me, okay?
Yeah, sure. Goodbye.
Okay. Namaskar. Bye-bye.
Bye.